we get there, because I'm gonna ask you so many questions about there. I, like you, grew up in a bad neighborhood, or not a bad neighborhood. I grew up in a low income neighborhood, a tough neighborhood. Second Ward, Houston is where I'm from. Right there on the east side of downtown.
Yeah, we're like big projects area. Yeah. We were like country folk.
Yeah. No. Well, I was like, what you think of whenever you think of like an inner city neighborhood is essentially like, minus the New York factor, where it's like
Well, New York in the 90s was a whole nother thing.
Right.
It's not like that anymore. New York is beautiful.
But that's essentially where I grew up. So I've definitely been around cannabis. I've been around weed. I've been around people. I have a lot of thoughts about it. But not thoughts in the sense that I am against it or anything like that. I just have a lot of I guess firsthand accounts as to why a lot of the legislation, doesn't really make any sense. But I also don't know that much about it. I think that it's not something that I've had a great interest in. I'll tie this back into like part of what your question earlier about, what do you think makes us this way? Why do you? Because you and I are pretty similar in that sense. It seems like, I think I got bitten by the bug of art very early on. At like 13, 14 years old. I became a professional dancer at 15, so I started touring very, very, very early on, and it was essentially my muse, and it really took me a lot of places. Before that, I was your run-of-the-mill story of like inner city kid, right? We're talking about like late 90s, early 2000s. I'm thinking like we were dressing in like South Pole jeans and white t-shirts and, just the whole hip-hop gambit there.
Yeah.
I think I didn't really have a purpose until I found art, and I think had it not been that, I think I would have just probably experienced weed in the same way that everybody else experiences weed, and then not been able to discern how it has its ties in other places and the political implications of it overall. But I think having not participated, or at least having not been engulfed by it in the same way that my friends were, I think that it really probably gave me a 30,000 foot view of it. I've smoked before. I like smoking, or I like just THC in general, just cannabis in general. It's not a big part of my life. I think I probably drink more than I take any kind of cannabis or THC in general, but it's completely destigmatized in my brain. Like for me in my brain, the way that I see it isn't really as a caricature the way that it
Dare.
gets. Yeah.
This is your brain on drugs.
Yeah.
Right.
So I actually have a lot of funny stories about Dare, but yeah. Like it doesn't necessarily
equating cannabis to heroin.
It's crazy.
Nonsensical.
It's insane.
It's not even scientific.
It's insane. Yeah.
There's no foundation for any of that
at all.
Science. Right. They made that shit up. It's literally propaganda.
Before you get into your spiel, because I know that it's coming, and I am actually like really curious about it. I purposely did not do any research. Like usually I know the guests that I have on, and I'm like, okay, let me like do some research so that I can like, if I want to have a thought-provoking conversation, maybe I can get it from them or whatever. Or I can know what to ask so that we can lead you can have a jumping off point from a previous conversation that I've already had. But I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go in this like blind, because even though I know I have a lot of experiences with weed in my neighborhood and like all these things, I also don't know a lot about it. So I want you to tell me, and I want you to get like my reaction. But before we get there, you said that you were in New York. I'm a New York junkie.
Are you?
Where did you live in New York?
Oh my God, I was spoiled. I don't know why I left.
You lived in Manhattan?
I mean, I love Texas. Of course, I love Texas, and I'm a Tejana, so of course I had to come back home and fight for my people. But New York, I lived in Queens, but I didn't live in Queens. It was like Queens, but not. So I was in LIC. It's called Long Island City, and people are like, Long Island?
Yeah. I
know
so the
old trains, right, they used to go through LIC, and then they would go into Long Island. Long Island City was a whole bunch of warehouses like 20 years ago, but then it's the most beautiful parks. It's the view of Manhattan. It's the tall building. So
that's your favorite borough then, is Queens?
Shit. Going from the projects to looking at being on floor 22, looking down and being like, holy hell, I'm in the clouds.
Oh,
like,
man, and that skyline from there is
dude,
gorgeous,
it was gorgeous.
right?
Yeah,
like
we had, my
Queens
sons
side.
had a view of all of New York City. So
Yeah.
I used to tell, people would be like, oh, you weren't in the city, you're not in Manhattan. I'm like, honey, I'm 5 minutes away from downtown. You have to go like north to south. That's 30 minutes for you.
Yeah.
I live here. I have the view. What are you're in the mess.
Yeah, I think Williamsburg probably just has like a more centered view of the
I
city.
like Williamsburg.
Yeah, but
I think once you end up one
I
spot,
understand.
though, you're
I get
Queens,
it. I
we
get it. I
represent
get it.
Queens.
I get it. I think
But
I'm a
Brooklyn has my heart too,
Yeah, I like Brooklyn a lot. If I were to live somewhere, I'd probably live in Brooklyn. But I don't discriminate.
Brooklyn's not Brooklyn though anymore,
Yeah,
right?
I know it's not.
Yeah, it's not what it used to be.
But I mean, like Harlem's got some spots.
Harlem
the
is
Bronx
holding tight.
got some spots.
Harlem is holding on. The Bronx holding on.
Yeah.
Spanish Harlem.
Spanish Harlem is so cool.
It's the best.
Oh my
man.
God, it's so nice up there, and I just like
You
the
still
city
go
as a
in the
whole.
summer and open a fire hydrant and have a good time. And
Such a great time.
And have paleteros selling
The
things.
raza up there is so good too. It's like so nice. Like
that was the thing. Like, so I'm Mexicana. I'm
Yeah.
Mexican American.
Yeah, so am I.
And we're from Texas.
I was
so
born
we're
in Monterrey
Tejanos.
too. So, but I was raised here.
But then being out there with the Dominicans and
Puerto
the Cubans and the
Ricans,
Puerto
oh,
Ricans,
it's so nice.
man, I was like, oh man, I'm sad. There's definitely no good Mexican food out in New York.
Yeah.
We're not out there. But the Dominicans and Cubans, all of our island brothers, man, they really embrace.
Oh,
I mean,
man.
of course, the island brothers. I can't stay away from them.
I
So
know,
I'm like,
man.
of course they embraced it. I was
Yeah,
excited about
of course.
Sorry.
It's okay. Hey, there's nothing to apologize for, man. It's not like I'm complaining about the Boricuas.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not like So, or the Dominicans, it's like,
It's also great because the accent is so different. So they're speaking Spanish. I'm like, I have no clue.
Ya
what
tú
you're
sabes,
saying.
ya tú sabes. Yeah, you're just like, okay, cool.
Ahora mami.
No,
I'm
I really enjoy New York. The bodegas up there. Oh my God, just like the whole community vibe up there that they have is so nice.
It's family. It's community.
Uh-huh.
I think that's what I loved about New York. It's what I miss. It's what, honestly, New York was one of the first times. So I'm at Tejana. I'm from here. These are my bloodline is native to the northern
lands, yeah.
Mexico, Texas region. Yeah. So we're from here, really from here.
For real. Yeah.
Right. That's why when they're like, go back, I'm like, what? We're here.
Yeah.
This is us.
Yeah.
But I never, because the way everything was with Texas and New Jim Crow South, I never felt at home in my own land. So when I went to New York, I cried, man, because when I finally got there, spent a week or so, and it was never a dream for me to live in New York. I was always like, no way. It's too, they're too crazy out there. It's too much.
But
then you get there and the community embraces you. You can be anybody from anywhere and have a dream and live in New York, and people will let you respect your hustle as long as you're doing your thing and putting it down.
Yeah, I love it.
If you're full of shit, they're gonna call you out. But
For real.
right? And I love that too.
Love
though.
that too.
We need that. We need more of that.
I have a dream of living in New York as an artist also. But I just frequent a lot. I used to go 4 or 5 times a year.
Yeah, I want to get my apartment. I wish I could get it back.
Last year was the first year I didn't go because I was here in Austin. I was building roots here, and I had a lot to do and things like that. But I'm planning on going back in the summer because I'm like, oh my God, I'm craving it so bad.
Yeah.
But anyway, I know that was a
no.
New
my
York,
boys want that too. I know. We'll digress all the way. Hey, we could talk about New York, cannabis.
Yeah. For sure. Okay, walk me through it. Texas. What's a good jumping off point? If we were going to talk about cannabis in general, is it better to start off with the history of cannabis, the prohibition side, and then work our way up to Texas, or is it better to start in Texas and then hint at what was going on in the past? So you tell me.
Prohibition, interestingly enough, folks think that federal prohibition just came up.
Right.
It really was driven largely by what was happening on the border with Mexico and Texas.
And this is prohibition in the 20s, you mean?
Yeah, this is, it's crazy. So,
because a lot of people register prohibition as alcohol, as the ban on alcohol,
they
and
did
the bootlegging.
alcohol,
and
then after alcohol, we can look at prohibition of alcohol, and there are a lot of parallels to cannabis prohibition. Essentially, when alcohol prohibition ended up the way that it did, a bloody mess, because you make something illegal, you actually drive up the value for the illicit market.
On the black market,
and
which is what happened.
Exactly. And then you have actors like Al Capone, figures like that,
Chicago's
who develop the a level of resource, and then you make the product that they are offering even more illicit, which drives up the value.
And then there's no regulation. So there's a danger to that.
So you're giving them a lot of, the no regulation is a real thing. That's a seriously modern issue.
Oh, for sure.
But keeping it prohibited didn't solve any problems, made things significantly worse. And then after they realized that and started to walk it back from the teetotaler movement, it was a political movement that kind of took over the nation and then pushed more of prohibition. Like we were torn on it with alcohol. After prohibition ended, they want to give alcohol back. Who's the next bad guy we can have? And it was cannabis, which was odd because cannabis leading up until that point, actually the United States. So cannabis seeds came to the United States. Obviously, we all know about like Maui Wowie and the Afghan Kush coming from the 70s. That's not when it first arrived, friends. Like the 70s, and that's not, I get it. Like
when I first think about weed, I just think about like Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
I think about like
and
purple.
That's when weed came to America, man. No. So cannabis was used in like ancient China and also grows in like the Hindu Kush and those regions, and has been an herbal plant. It was even used in Judaism. There's some like ancient Christian and Jewish ruins where they found the ashes and burning of cannabis plants that were used in the censers, the things where they burn the incense in religious ceremonies. So even in Jewish ceremonies, like Jesus very well could have been cool with Kush. Yeah. And I mean, if you think about it, some of that, man, just love each other. That sounds pretty stoner conversation. Not alleging that Jesus was a stoner, but it is actually likely that cannabis was used ceremoniously in those times.
I think it's undisputable now at this point that psychedelics and and just psyche,
entheogens,
correct, have been part of religious tradition and tribal tradition for millennia at this point. Or
since we were,
or centuries better.
Even before language, probably we were eating things that we found like mushrooms.
Yeah, I think at this point it's really undisputed. So that there should really be no nobody up in arms about that. Really,
no, but they are though, and that's it. That is so. Like when we look at, so it came to the U.S. from Asia, and it came through the Spanish colonizers and. Because we were using hemp. The hemp they were using in all of the sails and all of the roads, like all of those boats and ships were using hemp to create the fabric for the sails. And when we originally...
Which is very sturdy, by the way. Hemp is like the most sturdy material.
And not only that, but also leading up to the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, so we went all the way back to the colonial days. Came over and indigenous people were already using things like, we had psilocybin in Mexico. We had all of that.
Ayahuasca, all that jazz.
Exactly. And then also we have, when cannabis comes over, indigenous folks are already using native plants. So they're incorporating it into indigenous ceremony and practice because they understand it to be an herbal medicine from the earth.
Correct.
So it becomes a part of our indigenous culture and curanderismo, a lot of natural healing, but not only in Mexico and Latin American countries, also still
Caribbean,
in the Asian area, Asia region, and yes, in Africa also major roots with slave trade, still major roots there where they were putting seeds in hair, bringing it over.
It evolves a little bit once it hits different territories. I think if it gets to the Gulf, you get to New Orleans, you get to the Cajun, you get to voodoo, you get to a lot of it just has a lot of entanglement.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just trying to and everywhere else
so
where I see
maybe the big idea
like
is that people naturally were attracted to this plant that was providing medicinal relief for many things, joint pain, etc. Like I know a lot of indigenous healers, curanderas, and the modern healers still use cannabis oil created in an alcohol tincture to treat illnesses, by the village instead of
mind you
pharmaceutically.
The way that we found opiates was because they were using it in curanderismo, essentially, just to use a Latin term.
Chinese medicine.
They were, and that's how they found that it had pain killing attributes, right?
So we have all these great natural things, and cannabis feels like it's still very close to that. But then we had this use of the plant specifically by Mexicans in the early 1900s, and this was after the Mexican-American War. So what happens in this region of the country, like Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California,
Southwest,
all of this was Mexico. Then the United States, manifest destiny, they wanted more. Texas, the Republic of Texas, started because there were Anglo settlers from the Americas, which Mexico, the country of Mexico, had formed after the rebellion
French
from Spain,
Revolution,
right? So Mexico had formed, and the Anglo settlers came through Texas, wanted to settle some of the land, and instead, this battle started because they kept pushing their land borders, and they wanted to keep slaves.
Right.
And Mexico had already outlawed it.
So it was a capitalistic venture. I always have to say that, because
it's always about the money, man.
Whenever people talk about slavery, I always have to bring up the fact that anytime somebody wants to keep slaves, aside from the fact that it's an immoral position, right, it is also a capitalistic venture that they're talking about. They're not talking about their undying need to just own people. Right. They're talking about free labor. They're talking about money, a money making enterprise, right?
They don't see them as people.
Yeah, I have to always bring that up, because I assume that you can speak on this more, but I do know that the stigmatization and the widespread nationwide effort, propaganda, to villainize or create a caricature of the marijuana smoker, the marijuana person.
I mean, they literally said degenerate Mexicans.
Correct.
That's also, I kind of thought your podcast title was. Got it.
But I can explain my podcast title, but it kind of ties into that, because
well, we've been called degenerates from day one, because we were here on our own land and they wanted it.
Right.
So the best way to take what is not yours is to make enemy or demean or dehumanize anything that stands against you.
Right.
And they did that. Like, a lot of folks ask, well, why don't we have a whole lot of reservations for Native Americans in Texas? Or why don't Tejanos know that they're indigenous? Because they erased us.
Right.
They moved us to the other states, especially Oklahoma. They got rid of us from these areas, or they massacred us, or they lynched us in the 30s and 40s.
That's the one thing that people don't know about.
A lot
of people don't know that lynching happened to Hispanics and Latinos and Texans, Chicanos. Like, it happened to us.
Recent history.
100%.
That's my grandmother and my great grandmother.
Yeah, it was real. It was real. And I have a segment on this podcast called Identity Crisis where I want to dive into that, but I want to attack it in a very specific way. Anyway, I bring all the capitalism into it, because as I understand it, and again, you can speak on this more eloquently, the alcohol industry post-Prohibition was such a strong lobby and such a strong money-making machine that in the same way that I assume that the nicotine industry was also a big part of this.
Sure,
also.
Alcohol and tobacco have a lot of power. Or they did.
They wanted to caricaturize the marijuana smoker, the weed in general, because of their capitalistic ventures. It was, we want to make as much money as possible, and we want to destroy a sector of a potential
competitor.
A potential competitor that can cannibalize our consumer base.
So we're seeing that right now. Yeah. That's like in real time. So when it comes to like the original Prohibition, that may have played a big part. Who was getting what money where, especially because once the alcohol industry was formed, we already know alcohol, gambling, and underground crime networks and the U.S. government. They've all done deals together.
Yeah. So they've been aware of each other for a while,
that they haven't all been in cahoots at times. Even though the government is designed to create the law and enforce the law, we are well aware as the American public that counterintelligence operations and other operations, FBI operations, and also politicians, senators, legislators from the 60s and 70s just taking money under the table. You don't even have to have a whole agency to do it back then.
Over the table.
People, right?
Over the table.
And so, just calling it something else. The way, however you structure it to fit inside the business loophole. But they were a part of that prohibition. That was a part of it. But really, Henry Anslinger, a lot of it was racially motivated. And it was racially motivated specifically because of land rights and wanting to make sure that we establish control over the Republic of Texas, which had become a state by that point. Like, when we think about the Republic of Texas and then because after Texas, that's when all the rest of it comes. That's when California and all the rest of the American Southwest comes. Well, and they get all of that land. It starts there, and then it just dominoes. And Mexico goes from this whole thing to what it is now.
Right.
And still in today's era, we're having issues with the border. And I don't think it's that we have massive issues with the border. I think it's that as long as we position that we have issues with the border,
it's a political.
Then we can justify, like right now, military action is being taken on both sides. And yes, cartels are something we do need to be concerned about.
Of course.
Have to say, as an operator in cannabis and psychedelics, if we hadn't started this nonsense with cannabis, which by the way, white Americans also were using cannabis in the early 1900s. There are literally bottles of tinctures that they used to sell at the apothecaries before we had things like pharmacies and health insurance and all of these, the way that our modern healthcare system is now. Before that, we had these apothecaries, and everyone was using cannabis for joint relief or other, herbal remedies.